The morning light felt sharp against my eyes as I stared at my silent phone, its screen reflecting a version of my face I barely recognized, tired, anxious, already bracing for news I couldn't name. The house was too still, the kind of stillness that makes your heartbeat sound loud enough to echo. And somewhere deep inside, a cold certainty started to rise before anything was said out loud. If you've ever felt that kind of instinct, when your whole body knows something is wrong before your mind catches up, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from, because stories like this don't happen out of nowhere. That was the morning I realized my world was about to break open, and there was no going back. Let me show you how it all began. I knew something was wrong the moment my calls went straight to voicemail. It wasn't like my son, Evan, to disappear on me, no matter how strained things had become between us. As I stared at my phone, trying again and again, I felt that sharp pull in my chest, the kind only a mother understands. I kept telling myself he was busy, that he was wrapped up in that new life he built with Rachel, but the excuses weren't landing the way they used to. I kept replaying our last conversation. There was a heaviness in his voice that afternoon, a kind of tired retreat I couldn't quite name at the time. I tried to push past the distance Rachel had built between us, but every attempt seemed to tighten her grip. Even then, I could feel something wasn't right. I just didn't know how wrong it actually was. By the third day of silence, the worry wasn't whispering anymore, it was roaring. I sat at my kitchen table, staring out the window, trying to convince myself not to overreact. But intuition has a way of drowning out denial. I reached for my phone and called his workplace, hoping for something simple. Maybe he picked up extra shifts. Maybe he took some time off. Instead, I felt my stomach drop. They told me he hadn't shown up in over a week. No notice, no message, nothing. That was the moment the fear settled into my bones, and I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. Evan wasn't just distant. Something was deeply, dangerously wrong. When I hung up the phone that afternoon, I just sat there with my hands pressed against my face, trying to breathe through the shock. The idea that Evan had been gone longer than I even realized felt like a slap I never saw coming. I kept replaying the past few weeks, trying to pinpoint the moment the distance between us became something more dangerous than emotional withdrawal. I couldn't ignore how gradually Rachel had pulled him away from everyone who cared about him. At first, it looked like normal newlywed nesting, but slowly it became something else. Calls that used to be easy started feeling like intrusions. Visits were postponed, then canceled. Every time I tried to reach out, it felt like I was pushing through a wall she'd built around him. Looking back, those little shifts feel heavier now, like breadcrumbs I should have followed sooner. As the hours passed, I started calling anyone who might have seen him. Friends, co-workers, relatives, every name I could think of. Each time I explained that I couldn't reach him, I could hear the same confusion mirrored back in my own chest. No one had heard from him, not recently, not even casually. I tried the hospitals next, telling myself he might have had an accident, that maybe he was lying somewhere waiting for someone to claim him, but that brought no answers either. Just sterile reassurances and empty records. With every dead end, the dread settled deeper. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This wasn't a grown son needing space. Something had wrapped itself around my instincts and refused to let go. By the time the sun started dipping, I knew with a clarity that chilled me. Whatever had happened to Evan, I was already far too late in realizing it. Early that morning, just as I tried to steady myself after another sleepless night. My phone rang. The sound cut through the quiet like something sharp, and before I even answered, dread rushed up my spine. When I heard Rachel's voice, it didn't carry an ounce of emotion. She simply stated that Evan was gone, as if she were reciting something she barely cared to remember. For a moment, my mind refused to process the words. I felt the room tilt, the air disappear, and my whole body collapse inward. I kept waiting for some sign of compassion, some echo of the devastation she should have been feeling. But all I could sense was distance, cold distance. Then she mentioned the funeral, casually, almost like it was a formality she had already checked off. She said it had already happened, without me, without anyone who loved him before she came into his life. I felt something tear inside me. Grief hit first, hard and blinding, but right behind it came anger, hot, bewildered anger. None of this made sense. No illness, no accident, no explanation. Just an abrupt ending presented to me like an afterthought. As I sat there trying to breathe, a sharper realization pushed through the shock. The details were wrong. The timing was wrong. The tone in her voice was wrong. Every part of me knew I was being told a story that didn't add up. And that was the moment I knew I needed answers that day. I spent the rest of that morning in a fog, pacing my living room and trying to make sense of what I'd been told. The shock still clung to me, but underneath it, something steadier was forming. Disbelief can paralyze you, but it can also push you forward. And in my case, it lit a fire I couldn't ignore. I tried calling Rachel again and again, hoping she would answer and explain things in a way that felt human. But every call went straight to voicemail. The silence only sharpened my resolve. I turned next to the people who worked with Evan, hoping someone might have heard something, an accident, an emergency, anything that would bridge the widening gap between what I'd been told and what my instincts were screaming. Instead, all I found was confusion. They hadn't heard from him. They knew nothing about any accident. The more I reached out, the more hollow everything felt. By the afternoon, I started calling every agency I could think of. The state police, the sheriff's department, local hospitals, even the medical examiner's office. I braced myself for terrible confirmations, but what I found was even worse. There were no records at all. No accident report, no hospitalization, no death certificate, no body. Each denial chipped away at the lie I'd been handed hours earlier. Whatever had happened, the truth hadn't been spoken to me. I felt grief shifting into something sharper, steadier, almost cold. By early evening, I made up my mind. Sitting in uncertainty was no longer an option. I booked the next flight to Arizona, determined to look Rachel in the eyes, visit the place she claimed my son had been laid to rest, and finally uncover what had really happened. The flight to Arizona felt endless, even though I spent most of it staring out the window, trying to steady the chaos in my chest. By the time I reached Rachel's neighborhood, my nerves were buzzing with equal parts fear and determination. When she opened the door, the first thing that struck me was how calm she looked. No red eyes, no swollen face, no signs of the grief she claimed to be living through. The house itself was just as unsettling. No flowers, no sympathy cards, no traces of mourning. It was as if nothing had happened at all. I tried to read her expression, searching for even a flicker of pain, but all I saw was a kind of detached annoyance, like my presence was an inconvenience. Every instinct in me screamed that something was terribly off. I didn't stay long. I couldn't. The air in that house felt wrong, heavy in a way that made my skin crawl. From there, I drove straight to the cemetery. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit in the car for a moment before I could bring myself to walk inside. I found the plot number she claimed belonged to Evan. When I reached it, I froze. The soil was untouched. No freshly turned earth. No marker. No sign that anyone had ever been buried there. A staff member confirmed what my eyes already knew. There had been no burial, no service, no paperwork, nothing. I stood there, staring at the empty ground, feeling my stomach twist. It was all a lie. The funeral, the story, the finality she tried to force on me, every bit of it fabricated. And in that hollow stillness, the pieces started shifting. Something far darker was hiding beneath the surface, and I knew I had to uncover it. Leaving the cemetery, I felt hollow, like the world around me had shifted and I was the only one who noticed. I kept replaying the emptiness of that untouched ground, trying to steady myself. When a neighbor approached me outside Rachel's house later that evening, she mentioned seeing an ambulance there days before the supposed accident. Her voice held confusion, but mine held something else, a chilling certainty beginning to take shape. That tiny detail tightened every instinct I had. I started watching the house, unable to shake the feeling that Rachel was hiding something. When she drove off the next morning, I followed at a distance, my pulse thudding in my ears. She pulled into a storage facility on the edge of town. I stayed back, watching her disappear into a unit marked with a number that made my stomach twist. It was the same as the burial plot she'd given me, only reversed. That couldn't be a coincidence. I called the detectives I'd spoken to earlier, recounting everything. I could hear the shift in their tone as each detail stacked onto the next. They agreed it was enough to pursue a warrant. After hours of waiting, pacing, and second-guessing every breath I took, they told me they were moving forward. I had to return home briefly while they worked through the process, but I never truly left Arizona behind. The moment the detective called and said they had opened the unit, I was already booking my flight back. Whatever was inside had changed their voices, and I knew it was about to change my life. When I walked into the station, I could feel the air change around me. The detectives didn't need to speak for me to understand that whatever waited behind their silence would break me in ways I wasn't prepared for. Their faces carried the kind of heaviness people wear when they've run out of softer ways to deliver the truth. They led me into a small room and began laying out what they found in the storage unit. I remember staring at each item the way someone watches their life unravel thread by thread. Evan's jacket, his watch, a stack of papers with his name written in his careful handwriting, things he would never have willingly parted with. Each detail pushed me closer to a truth my heart kept trying to reject. And then came the confirmation, quiet, clinical, undeniable. My son was gone, not missing, not lost. Gone because someone chose to end his life. The grief hit like a tidal wave, folding me in on myself until I could barely breathe. I kept waiting to wake up, to find some way for the facts to bend, but they didn't. As the detectives continued, they uncovered something even darker. Records linking Rachel to other men who had died under suspicious circumstances. Different cities, different years, the same pattern hiding in plain sight. My numbness twisted into something hotter and sharper. That was the moment denial died. I felt something settle inside me, not peace, not acceptance, but resolve. If Rachel thought she could bury the truth, she had no idea how far I was willing to go. And the hunt for her was only just beginning. The shock from the station stayed lodged in my chest like a stone, but beneath it, something fiercer had ignited. Grief no longer held me still, it pushed me forward. I kept replaying every detail the detectives uncovered, trying to understand how someone could walk through life leaving tragedies behind them like shadows. And then it hit me. Rachel wasn't just hiding. She was preparing to run. I saw it in the way she moved over the next day. The hurried trips to her car, the bags she loaded with a practiced rhythm, the tight glances over her shoulder. My instincts told me she was slipping into the same pattern she'd used before. I followed her from a distance, keeping my breath steady as she drove across town, stopping at banks, storage facilities, and one cheap motel on the outskirts. Each stop tightened the knot in my stomach. She was getting ready to disappear. I tried reaching out to law enforcement again, but their caution felt like a wall I kept crashing into. They wanted more evidence, more confirmation, more time, but time was exactly what I didn't have. Every hour she stayed free was another hour closer to her vanishing for good. So I started collecting what I could, photos, notes, timestamps, anything that could prove her intentions. I felt like I was walking a thin line between courage and fear, but I kept going because stopping meant accepting defeat. That night, watching her slip into her house with the lights off and curtains drawn, I felt the danger shift toward me, and I knew the next step would pull me directly into her path. The moment I stepped onto my porch, something inside me tightened. The house felt wrong, as if the air itself had been disturbed. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that the exhaustion and fear were twisting everything out of proportion. But when I saw the deadbolt sitting halfway turned, my breath caught in my throat. I knew I had locked it. I always locked it. Inside, the silence felt heavy. I noticed little things first. My coat knocked off its hook, a drawer left open in the kitchen, the faint trace of mud on the hallway floor. It wasn't a messy break-in. It was careful, almost deliberate, like someone wanted me to know they had been here without destroying anything. That quiet precision made my skin crawl far more than chaos would have. Then I saw it on my coffee table. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was Evan's watch, the one he wore every day, the one he never took off unless he was showering. I hadn't seen it since before he vanished. Seeing it sitting there, perfectly centered, felt like a knife pressed against my ribs. She had been in my home. She had touched his things, and she wanted me to know it. Fear flooded me so fast I had to grab the edge of the counter to steady myself. But beneath the fear was something sharper, a realization that Rachel was no longer running. She was circling me. I backed out of the house, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself to think. I couldn't stay there another minute. I needed help. I needed a plan, and I knew exactly who I had to call next. I drove straight to Mark's place because he was the only person I trusted to think clearly when I couldn't. The fear from the break-in clung to me like a second skin, and by the time he opened the door, I felt myself shaking with more than exhaustion. I laid everything out for him, the storage unit, the pattern of victims, the watch on my table. Saying it all at once made the danger feel even sharper, but it also solidified something in me. I wasn't imagining any of this. She was hunting again. As we pieced together the timeline, a sickening realization settled over us. Rachel wasn't disappearing. She was shifting her focus. There was someone new, a man she had been meeting quietly, a man who reminded me painfully of how she first latched onto Evan. I had seen his name on a piece of mail at her house without thinking much of it, but now it played back in my mind with terrible clarity. He had no idea what he was stepping into. I felt a pull inside me, a mix of dread and responsibility. I couldn't let another family end up where I was. Mark felt it too, and together we began shaping a plan. Not reckless chasing, but a controlled trap. Something that would force her hand while keeping him safe. We talked through locations, timing, and how to get law enforcement on standby without tipping her off. By the time we finished, the path ahead was unmistakable. The confrontation was coming, and it would happen soon. As I closed my eyes, I could feel it tightening around us, drawing us straight toward the capture that had to happen next. We took our positions just after dusk, each of us tucked into the shadows behind the small park where she liked to meet her targets. My heart thudded so hard it felt like it echoed against the bench I crouched behind. Every sound sharpened, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of traffic, even my own breathing. I kept my eyes fixed on the path, fighting the pull of memories that wanted to drag me back into grief instead of keeping me grounded in the moment. When she finally appeared, it was as if the air tightened around us. She moved with that same practiced calm I had seen before, stepping toward him with a kind of predatory intent that made my blood run cold. I wanted to scream, to run at her, to do anything except sit frozen in place. But I stayed still, gripping the bench until my hands ached. The shift happened fast. She leaned in closer to him, and in that instant, officers surged from their positions. The shouts, the movement, the flash of uniforms, it all blurred together, and yet I saw every detail with painful clarity. She tried to run. She tried to fight, but they forced her down, restrained her. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something inside me break loose. Relief, terror, grief, all of it at once. My legs gave out, and Mark caught me before I hit the ground. I remember staring at the spot where they held her, realizing it was finally over, yet knowing the real reckoning was only beginning. When the officers led her away that night, a strange quiet settled over me. After months of terror and confusion, the sudden stillness felt almost unreal, as if my body hadn't caught up with the truth. I remember sitting in the back of Mark's car, hands trembling, trying to understand that the danger had finally stopped. But the absence of fear didn't bring peace right away. It only made room for grief. And that grief came in waves I wasn't ready for. The days that followed were heavy. I moved through them slowly, meeting with detectives, giving statements, sorting through paperwork that felt impossibly cold. When the trial finally began, I sat there every day, listening to pieces of my son's life reduced to evidence. It wasn't the justice I once imagined, but it was the justice we had. And when the verdict was read and she was taken away for good, I felt a fragile breath of relief move through me, thin but real. What surprised me most was how the community responded. People I barely knew reached out with meals, letters, or quiet kindness. Evan's co-workers held a small memorial, something simple and honest, and it meant more to me than they probably realized. Their stories helped me remember him as he was, not as he was taken. Healing didn't happen all at once. It came in small moments, morning walks, sorting through his old boxes, allowing myself to laugh again without guilt. I started volunteering with a local support group for families navigating sudden loss, and in those meetings, I found a sense of purpose I didn't expect. Sharing my story didn't erase the pain, but it gave it direction. I honor my son by choosing to live with intention, by refusing to let fear define what remains of my life. And if you're listening to this and carrying your own story of loss or unanswered questions, I hope you'll share it below. Your voice matters, and you don't have to carry it alone. There are days now when I wake up and feel a quiet steadiness settling in before the memories rush back. It's not that the pain has disappeared, it's that I've learned how to carry it without letting it swallow the rest of my life. Losing my son changed every part of me, but so did surviving, and so did choosing to keep moving forward with purpose instead of fear. I think about him in the small moments. Sunlight on the kitchen table, a song he once loved, the way he used to laugh when he was trying not to. Those memories hurt, but they also guide me. They remind me that love doesn't end just because a life does. It shifts, it deepens, it becomes something you live by. My purpose now is simpler and stronger than anything I had before. I speak for families who are grieving, for people who feel lost or overlooked, for anyone who needs to know they aren't alone. I honor my son by choosing compassion, by choosing courage, and by choosing to tell the truth even when it shakes me. If you've walked through something heavy, or if you're still trying to make sense of your own story, I hope you'll share it below. I'm here, and I'm listening,